So, well, this was actually quite an interesting topic for me to reflect about and to talk about, because it's not something that I usually speak about. I mean, certainly not lecture about. So I wrote some things down about this topic. It's, of course, some of my personal story, which I want to share with you now. So at the opening of last year's PDHU academic year, the students and teachers were asked to identify with one of two groups: anywhere people and somewhere people. This distinction was based on a book, The Road to Somewhere, by the British author David Goodhart. The book has a subtitle, The Populist Revolt and the Future of Politics. Goodhart wrote this book in response to the Brexit. According to him, the world is no longer divided by political choices between left and right, but by the divide between the anywhere and the somewhere people. This schism would account for the Brexit vote, for the election of Donald Trump, for the decline of the center-left, and for the rise of populism across Europe. Even though I think this explanation is a bit oversimplified, and also a little bit biased against somewhere people, of whom, among other things, he also said that they tend to be more religious, which he sees as a bad thing, I still raised my hand to identify as an anywhere person. The anywhere person can also be called a global citizen. Like many people who have moved around a bit, I am a person with several affiliations and belongings. Some of these have remained stable, but others have changed over time. Such changes over time and shifting of important identity markers such as nationality and religion are undoubtedly characteristic for the global arena in which many of us operate. Now, first, there is, of course, national identity. From the start, I already had two. I am a Belgian and I'm Flemish. Now, these two identities I received at birth. Like many Belgians, the Belgian identity doesn't give me any warm feelings. Of course, the chocolate and the beer and the fries, which are actually not French, but Belgian, mind you, so they're the best of the world. But I do not see this as part of my identity. Only when I moved to Holland and later to the US, I realized that it is common to have patriotic feelings and to show these by flying a flag on certain occasions. A few Belgians hang a Belgian flag on the national holiday. To the contrary, in my family, people who were flying a Belgian flag on the Belgian holiday, they were, for some reason, a bit frowned upon. They were called royalists. In any event, no private house in Belgium would fly a flag on the birthday of the king. In Holland, the national holiday and the birthday of the king coincide, and many people fly a flag on that day. Dutch also hang national flags with backpacks attached to them when their kids graduate from high school. In the US, everyone flies flags everywhere and for many reasons. And when I lived in the US, I discovered that there are even special burial boxes for retired flags. Also, Israelis, as you know, display flags on houses and cars and where not, as tokens of national identity. But not so the Belgians. Most also don't know the Belgian national anthem. Flemish identity, that's something else. As you may know, Flemish is a Dutch spoken in Belgium. And it's in the northern part of Belgium where this language is spoken is called Flanders. For your information, in the south they speak French, and that part is called Wallonia. So we don't fight with the Walloons, not anymore. It's all been settled with the language borders and with federal governments and regulations. Some villages have been exchanged, and actually all is quiet now. Most Walloons even speak good Dutch nowadays. The other way around has always been the case. So, yet many Flemish are proud to be Flemish. And we know the Flemish anthem. It's called the Proud Flemish Lion. But hanging a flag with the same lion, that's a bit too much for most people, because nowadays Flemish nationalism often goes hand in hand with right-wing ideas, and not everyone wants to be associated with that. Now, in the same way that I was born Flemish, I was also born Catholic. In Belgium, these two often go hand in hand. You are born in a Catholic family, you go to Catholic schools, also because they say they're the best schools. You belong to a Catholic youth movement, you go to a Catholic, even have a Catholic health insurance, Catholic union, all those things. You don't necessarily go to church very often. The Catholic thing is mostly a matter of identity more than of conviction. So when I was a child, being Catholic meant, of course, that I was baptized, but also you did Holy Communion, because that's all the kids in your class did that. And often you're married in church, even though by the time I reached that age, things were starting to change. I did married, but not in church, and unfortunately that marriage didn't stand, but on the other side I'm very happy that I met Rob, who joins me now on my global travels. So back in time, as a student at that Catholic university in Louvain, I studied Biblical Hebrew, but different from most of my fellow students, I thought it might be useful to learn modern Hebrew as well. Probably not many people in Flanders had that idea, because I received 2 times the same scholarship from the Flemish Cultural Agreement with Israel for a summer ulpan at the Hebrew University. When I applied for the 3rd time for such a scholarship, this time for a year, and I got it again, some professors started to find this suspicious. Was Belgium not good enough? What should come of all this Judaizing? And they mentioned some in their horrific example of a former student who had made it to secretary of the bishop, but who had afterwards become Jewish and ultra-Orthodox at that. He's now actually a successful colleague in Tel Aviv University, but for some reason, for my old professors, he might as well have become a criminal. Nevertheless, when I finished my studies, I moved to Holland, and I started to wear orange on Queen's Day, and I had my first position, which included teaching Judaism, Hebrew and Aramaic, and not actually biblical studies, which is my official degree. I had written a dissertation on Midrash, most of which I learned in the Judah Palace Institute of the University of Amsterdam, where I traveled by train every week. And of course, I also learned a lot here in Jerusalem at the Hebrew University. All this happened before I was officially Jewish. Yet in my heart, I knew that Judaism was where I belonged. It took me several years before I eventually did the Giyur, and that was in the United States, where I was spending a sabbatical as a visiting scholar at JTS. I don't remember whether I had thought beforehand about converting in the US, but I don't think so, actually, because I was very busy making a career and getting babies and those things. I just know that when I had my first talk with my contact there, who's Professor Bert Vysotsky, I asked him whether he knew a synagogue in my neighborhood. I was living in Summit, New Jersey, where I could go for the high holidays. So he picked up the phone and he called the rabbi of the JCC in Summit. The rabbi asked to get me on the phone. He offered us tickets to get to shul on the high holidays, and his wife immediately invited us for lunch on Rosh Hashanah. So soon after, when I started talking to him, I raised the subject of conversion. And he answered, you don't have to take the Giyur classes because you could actually teach them, but just get a Siddur and start coming to shul and see if you feel at home. So I had several talks with him, and actually about a year later, I was Jewish. That 1 year in the US, because we went for only 1 year, eventually became 9 years. My kids went to the Jewish preschool, to the Hebrew school. I became active in the synagogue. I started lioning, teaching even. I was even active in the sisterhood. So when I moved back to the Netherlands after 9 years, I immediately looked for a synagogue, which I found in the liberal Jewish community of Tilburg, which is sort of the closest by. It's not really close by, but that's how we have to do it in the Netherlands. Because conservative synagogues are very rare in the Netherlands. And I discovered that liberal in Holland is actually closer to conservative than to reform. Anyway, I couldn't be too picky, because outside of Amsterdam, in the Medina, as we call it, one usually doesn't have a shul around the corner. So this was a big step down from the situation in New Jersey that I had known for almost 10 years. So maybe because of the scarcity, the people that belong to a Jewish community are usually quite involved in Holland. So I soon found my way. They could use an extra lioner, and I became a member of a commission that deals with organization of the services. I chose Judaism because that was a culture to which I felt that I belonged. The choice was gradual and started maybe before I was aware of it. Maybe it started in my Catholic high school, when the teacher of religion presented Judaism in a way that was for me more interesting than the other religions he spoke about. Maybe even earlier with my mother, who loved Yiddish music, And she put the radio always louder when Mirjam Fuchs, who was then a popular Yiddish singer in Belgium, was on. I remember a few other landmarks. I read Leon Uris's book Exodus, which gave me a very romantic picture of Israel before I'd ever been here. I saw this movie Yentl with Barbara Streisand. So I put up this gigantic poster of Barbara Streisand dressed up as a yeshiva boy in my student dorm. So then came the visits to Israel, first for the Ulpan, then for my PhD research. I also sometimes came as a travel guide. Several Israelis said that I had this Jewish neshama, which I considered as a compliment. Now, I'm usually rather rational, but I must say that with respect to my way to Judaism, I cannot explain everything. I was in a way drawn into it. One choice led to another, and yet to another, and so it happened. I usually say that I got it through my studies, but then why did I decide to study Judaism at the Faculty of Theology at the Catholic University, where actually they didn't even have a professor of Judaism? Well, there was actually one in the Faculty of Literature who taught Jewish literature and iconography and some history, and I took all of his courses. He actually had been thrown out of the Faculty of Theology because, being a priest, he had decided to get married. So they had to relocate him to, within the university, do a different, less sensitive department, let's say. Now, sometimes I get very critical questions from others, even from myself. So people ask, how could you voluntarily become part of a people that was almost exterminated in the part of the world where you were born? Sometimes I wonder, can I ever adopt the Jewish history as my own, including its terrible aspects? Would I have converted in 1950? Probably not, but I did it in 2001, and I feel that this was the right way for me to do it. So now I'm teaching at the Protestant Theological University as the only non-Protestant member of the teaching staff. The Synod, the highest authority in the Dutch Protestant Church, had to vote to sanction actually my appointment. The fact that the PJHU has made this exception for me makes me feel very honored. I feel the responsibility to present Judaism and Jewish studies as attractive subjects because that's why they hired me. The positive attitude in the Protestant Church is very different from what I recall as was the case at the Catholic Faculty of Theology in Belgium, even though I know things have changed also there now. I admit that sometimes I feel a bit of an outsider at the PJHU, and I realize that students and colleagues find me a bit exotic. I know that's not only because of my being Jewish, but also because of my Belgian accent. So actually, I'm no longer aware of that accent. Only when somebody makes a remark about it, I say, oh yes, that's true. Maybe people can hear it. And my name is rather Belgian, Flemish actually. So I dance through the global arena, sporting various identities. I'm actually seriously considering becoming Dutch for practical reasons. This means that I will have to give up my Belgian nationality, in fact. The only reason I actually want to do is because, well, I can't vote. I feel like I should be able to vote in the country where I live. I don't know anything about Belgian politics anymore. All my children, my 3 daughters, they have double nationality, but they will all become Dutch, I'm sure. So if I would have stayed in the US, I would probably have done the same. So my choice of Judaism was actually against all odds and not practical, not logical. So maybe that's why it's probably my strongest identity.